available if you have a question about what happened to a particular issue. The subject of this meeting is really to focus on those issues where follow-up was needed and the committee had not taken a full recommendation yet. So that's our focus today. And we do have staff from DEP here. We also have staff from the Department of Permitting Services Well and Septic section. I know there were some septic issue questions last time, and so if those come up again, we have Heidi Benham here from DPS that can help us with those. I believe we also may have planning department staff. They were invited to come as well. We'll see if they're here. Oh, there we are. I see Jason over there.
Thanks everyone for joining us.
So I have the packet on the screen just as a way to keep things organized as we go through. I also did do an addendum earlier today that's attached to the end of this packet. As we get into issues that are affected by that, I will flip to that packet on the screen and walk through the issues so folks in the audience who may not have that packet can understand what we're talking about and what the issues are. So yeah, the first part of the packet I mentioned, the summary. The first item that I wanted to bring back today was the abutting mains policy. We talked about this a good bit at the first meeting, and there was some discussion about some of the new elements in the executive's recommended plan update. Oh. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my laptop, but what you're seeing is this. So there, it's on page 2 of the packet. One of the significant changes in the abutting mains policy that the executive is recommending is a process that would allow for limited extensions under certain circumstances that DEP could, DEP and WSSC Water could jointly.
Staff as well. So let me turn to Councilmember Navarro first.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. It's really great to be here with all of you this afternoon to discuss this very important initiative. You know, we can write all the initiatives that we want, we can present them, we can, you know, adopt them, et cetera, but it's all in the execution and the people who are tasked with executing and making sure that it's implemented. So I am thrilled to see you, Ms. Maki, leading this effort for our school system, because you are, you know, so you know, you're very familiar with all of the issues that have faced MCPS for many decades. And the truth of the matter is that the issues have not necessarily changed. They have just become a bit more complex. But at the same time, the great news is that we have a blueprint at the state level, but I think also locally, we have worked together with our school system to make sure that we are enhancing a lot of the elements that were already envisioned in this particular blueprint. So we're not starting from scratch, and I think we have the people in place that can definitely take it to the next level. I also believe that we have no choice. We absolutely, this is not a optional thing. As we're looking at issues of workforce, the shortage that we're seeing in terms of workforce, but also the jobs of the so-called future that are already here, and how are we going to match our you know, young people to those jobs. I mean, all of that is going to be really important for the socioeconomic viability of this county and really the nation. So it does start here. And as Chairman Rice said, you know, investing in our teachers and making sure that they are there to do what it takes, it's going to be very important. So it is about reorganizing priorities, and this pandemic has taught us how to do that under duress. So hopefully now we can take the time and do this, you know, in a strategic and very informative fashion. So I look forward to the presentation and all the great results that will be attained because of this collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Navarro. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and great to be with my colleagues on the committee. This is rarefied air now as we head into the fall, so every time we're together, I'm happy to have it. Also, just want to say that I agree completely with my colleagues. This is the work. If I had to narrow down to one reason I got into public service and from my experience and growing up here in this community, it's to make sure every student, every child, every family has access to a high quality education. And I've been so proud to work on each one of these pillars with my colleagues, early childhood and education. Obviously, today we're focusing on diverse and high quality leaders, college and career readiness, workforce, making sure that our students have the mental health and the wraparound services. And then obviously, robust oversight and accountability in the system, right? And all those components. And it's great that we have a team at MCPS focused on that and making sure we implement it. We're entering this first year, next year, of implementation of this awesome, massive 10-year project, but it's obviously a lifelong project. And I know the time window couldn't be more critical, with all the things that our kids have been through, all the things our families have been through. We have to get this right, and we have to dramatically reimagine and step up what our education system and supports look like. And that's why we passed the biggest MCPS budget ever, $200 million over the last year, and we're going to keep moving forward. But there's a lot of details, as you all know. So I'm glad we had this session. Appreciate the chair, so that we can dig into this piece of it. Because I know I still hear from parents and teachers and staff. We had this 500 somewhat shortage at the beginning of the year. I know we'll get an update on where we are. That how people that are stressed and maxed out. We have contract negotiations that need to begin. We've got this whole context of we can't get this done unless we figure out all these things. So, and it's all part of the blueprint. So I'm excited to be in this session and appreciate the work that you all are doing, and look forward to asking some questions and engaging in a conversation. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Jawando, and I want to echo all the sentiments of my colleagues. We are at an amazing time right now where we have some opportunities that are before us. And I think that while there's been conversations about some possible revisions to Blueprint, which may happen this upcoming session, to make it even stronger and better and more responsive to the needs of our community, the reality is that we're well underway to something that is going to revise how we educate our students here in the state of Maryland. And that's for the better. And that's phenomenal. And so very happy to see that we also have some partners with us today. We have our student member of the board, Arvin Kim, who's with us. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I know we have our former student member of the board right behind him, Mr. Eric Garcia, as well as our Executive Director of Human Resources, Darlene Harris, with us as well. So thank you very much for being here as we have this incredible discussion around what some of the next steps are. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Rodriguez to kind of walk us through some of the steps here in terms of a discussion. I know that we have a presentation also with Montgomery County Public Schools to give us kind of a highlight as to where we're going and where we see some of the challenges may be and support that may be necessary for us as well. And then we'll take it there as far as some of the next steps, colleagues. So let me turn it over to Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, council members and Chair Rice. Today, as you mentioned, we'll be discussing the high quality and diverse teachers and leaders section of the blueprint. There are 5 key policy areas of the blueprint, and on March 10th, the Education and Culture Committee, as well as the Health and Human Services Committee, met to receive an overview of the blueprint, understanding its timeline, its policy goals, as well as the role of the coordinator, the county council, county government, and the Accountability and Implementation Board. And so this fall, we have a few meetings tentatively scheduled, to discuss the remaining parts of the blueprint in the 5 key policy areas, with today's being the high quality and diverse teachers and leaders. We have a presentation from Ms. Janine Backey and Ms. Cindy Pinkard, who will discuss the top areas of this, so including the recent action and updates in this area, as well as any related issues like you'd mentioned about staffing shortages. The packet includes a brief section on the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, timeline and goal, as well as the requirements under this key policy area, and their presentation. So you can find their presentation on Circle page 1, but we will be going over that now.
May I begin? Okay. An update on the Maryland's Blueprint for the Future, House Bill 1372. Next. There are 5 blueprint policy areas for mandated reform. As Ms. Hernandez mentioned, today we'll focus on high quality and diverse teachers and leaders. There are 5 areas of the blueprint, and the blueprint's overarching intent is to provide a world-class education for every student in Maryland. That's also aligned with the MCPS Board of Education's vision to inspire learning by providing the greatest public education for each and every student, and also Dr. McKnight's priorities to attract, recruit, and develop a high-quality, diverse workforce, maximizing organizational excellence to meet the needs of all students. Next. An update on the Accountability and Implementation Board and the Maryland State Department of Education. The Accountability and Implementation Board is also known as the AIB. It's an independent unit of the state government that was created to ensure that the blueprint is implemented and as intended. The AIB is fully up and running and fully staffed. They've held summer interactive workshops on Pillar 2, high quality teachers and diverse leaders, through June, July, August, and even through September 2022 to review the statutes and to ensure that there's a common understanding of the blueprint with the public at large, including a wide cross-section of stakeholders. A career ladder plan must be developed by each local education agency by July 1st, 2024. And so this is an area of great interest. There's been a lot of discussion regarding the career ladder. We are awaiting an MSDE playbook, which will give us guidance on the state's parameters on the career ladder. Much of the career ladder will be negotiated through collective bargaining, so we will be engaging in meaningful collaboration with our employee associations. The related work group will meet in October before and after the draft criteria is shared by the AIB in order to provide further input and feedback. So this will be an ongoing process for the next 2 years in developing the career ladder. The draft blueprint comprehensive report criteria will be shared by the AIB in mid to late October for feedback. The AIB will hold a tentative public hearing on November 10th, and the final criteria for reporting will be distributed to local education agencies by December 1st, 2022, and each jurisdiction will submit a comprehensive blueprint implementation plan by March 2023. Next. I'll talk a little bit about successful strategies to address staffing shortages. And I'd just like to say that I'm very pleased to report that at the start of school, MCPS had 99% of its vacancies filled. As you know, this is a national issue with teacher shortages. It's a statewide issue as well. But I think there have been a number of strategic moves by the school system that have brought us to this point today. So I'm proud to say there are 99% of the vacancies were filled at the start of school. There are a number of strategies that have been in use to address shortages, and I'll just name a few. One is a year-round ongoing strategic recruitment plan. So it's not just in the summers and at the end of the year when we're trying to recruit. It's ongoing, it's throughout the year. It has many various prongs to try to recruit and attract more teachers, but also teachers of a diverse background. There are pop-up recruitment events at local malls, community locations, and that has been especially fruitful for recruiting supporting services staff. And we've also continued to conduct summer job fairs. Next. In terms of diversity in hiring and recruitment, school year 2021-2022, over 1,390 diverse teacher candidates applied for employment with MCPS. And again, in school year 2021-2022, 442 diverse candidates were hired by MCPS, or about 43%. MCPS's goal for this year, 2022-2023 school year, is to increase our diverse applicant pool by 300 or by 20% to raise that up to 1,700. So the goal is to increase our diverse hires by 10% or up to 500 teachers. So there's been a significant effort in this area. The numbers are continuing to increase while at the same time ensuring that we're bringing in high quality applicants for our students. Next. In terms of MCPS recruitment actions, the goal is to increase to 25% our participation with the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, and increase by 25% our participation in historically black colleges and universities, also known as HBCUs, in our targeted states: Texas, Puerto Rico, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, New York and New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania. The Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities has a specific set of target universities as well: University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, Texas State, Texas A&M, University of Central Florida, Florida Atlantic University, University of Puerto Rico, Central University of Bayamón, Puerto Rico, and Inter-American University of Puerto Rico. The HBCU target universities include Howard University, University of the District of Columbia, Bowie State, Morgan State, Coppin State, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, Hampton University, Virginia State, Delaware State, Florida A&M, North Carolina A&T, and North Carolina Central. And we'd like to increase by 10% our participation in Asian-serving institutions in our targeted states: Virginia, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and targeted universities: the University of Maryland, University of Virginia, Boston College, Boston University, and state universities at New York, Albany. So there have been a number of efforts to reach out to colleges and universities that have a diverse group of students, to try to recruit them, the best students and the high quality students, to be a part of our workforce. Next. I'll spend a minute talking about the Grow Your Own. It establishes a strategic timeline for Grow Your Own efforts in collaboration with internal MCPS stakeholders. So the system has done some work. It's developed an internal employee referral program designed to refer top talent to MCPS. The Grow Your Own is presented in collaboration with the partnership unit to summarize students about the multiple and varied array of career pathways available within MCPS. We've partnered with the MCPS Career Pathways program to develop literature and map out strategic next steps to align the program to our Grow Your Own efforts. We've collaborated with the Employee Association, MCEA, to explore strategies to elevate the teaching profession. We have celebrated an inaugural cohort of 12 future MCPS educators during the Future Educators Celebration event. And MCPS was selected for the Maryland Leads Grant, which includes a focus on Grow Your Own. And I believe my colleague is going to tell us a little bit more, share a little bit more.
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Sydney Pinkard, and I serve as a coordinator in the Office of Human Resources and Development in Montgomery County Public Schools. And so one piece that I'd like to offer to the council today is the excitement that I have for this new position. I have been in MCPS as an educator and a central office administrator for 27 years. And under the leadership of Dr. McKnight and the support of our Board of Education, we have additional resources in our HR department that allow us to be extremely strategic and intentional with our recruitment efforts in MCPS in ways that we weren't able to do before, or it was, a strain to do without additional resources. And so I think that has contributed quite a bit to being able to hit that target of 99% of our vacancies filled at the start of the school year. One of my primary roles moving forward is to really explore the recruitment of our current MCPS students and our recent alumni. So engaging our secondary students as early as the middle school level and as in the high school level to showcase MCPS not only as the place where they go to school, but as an employer, the largest employer in the area, and be able to share with them pathways where they can enter the education profession and or other aspects of the school system and grow their career and remain with us. A number of our students do go to colleges locally and come back as teachers, so there is an intention with our recruitment to engage our former grads, or our former students rather, when they are prepared to come back and have finished their educator preparation program. And the final piece that I'll offer, and welcome any questions if there be any, is that we are also being very focused on engaging our students who are involved in dual enrollment programs within MCPS. So dual enrollment is that umbrella of students who are taking not only the MCPS courses, but are also taking college courses, whether that be at Montgomery College or other types of programs, but engaging them because they're well on their way to their post-secondary education, and becoming a teacher or an educator is an option that we want them to see at the forefront. Oh, yeah. One other piece that I can offer, as of Friday, we received some great news that our colleagues over at Montgomery College have been approved by the state of Maryland for a grant that will prepare individuals to meet the qualifications to become pre-K teachers, certified pre-K teachers in the state of Maryland. And this, I know, is a long-time effort on our college partnership, our partners at the college, and we will be the LEA, or the local school, who will support that grant. And not only will it serve the members of the community who may be getting pre-K certification in child care centers, but it will also extend to our employees in the district, supporting service staff who may want to also pursue pre-K education as a career pathway.
And I just share the excitement. I know that we have a number of our community members who have bachelor's degrees who are interested in becoming certified pre-K3 so that they can also be eligible to be providers for Blueprint. So this is going to open up the doors and provide more of a pathway for many of our community members who are trying to determine how they can also work and be able to go to school at the same time. So that will be a great opportunity for a number of them, for the community as well. So that's good news. Next, we can talk about National Board Certified Teachers. So MCPS has more than 650 currently National Board Certified Teachers currently working to achieve 650 teachers currently working to achieve National Board Certification for the first time. We have 621 teachers who hold an active National Board Certification. We have the largest amount statewide. There are many counties that do not have any Nationally Board Certified teachers, some from anywhere from 3 to 30. So we really hold the largest number, and we are continuing to build these cohorts each year of teachers. So they are refining their instructional strategies. They're working better at learning how to individualize instruction for students, and really kind of honing their craft and also increasing their status in their profession, which is also one of the goals of the Blueprint. MCPS, in conjunction with the Employee Association, MCEA, supports teachers working towards National Board Certification in a variety of ways. This past summer, MCEA sponsored a Jumpstart, which is a 3-day seminar providing a comprehensive overview of the National Board Certification. In October, teachers will engage in National Board Certification component support courses, which are approved by the Maryland State Department of Education for continuing professional development credit. Each course is a 5-session series designed to support teachers in the completion of a component required for National Board Certification. This year, 25 sections of the component support courses were made available, serving up to 625 teacher participants. Finally, candidates for National Board Certification have access to a variety of resources and mentoring and self-paced courses provided by the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, which are accessible on the MCPS National Board Certification website. As you know, those teachers who are deemed eligible under the Blueprint are receiving an additional $10,000 salary increase. And so we're continuing to build our cohorts of National Board Certified teachers to mentor and support them along the way and to encourage the leadership and professional development of those teachers. So I just would like to add that piece. Next. And for any further information and to provide some feedback, here's a listing of various websites that include MSDE, MCPS, the AIB, where you can also go on to get additional information. The system would just like to thank the council for your tireless support on the blueprint, for all the work from the Kerwin Commission on, and for really encouraging this type of ongoing continuous improvement as we increase our workforce, as we increase the diversity of our workforce, but also looking at ways in which we need to support and recruit a more diverse community. I know also the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards has also made some national efforts to reach out to more teachers of color, to expand their support, to develop some cohorts and support services for teachers of color to ensure that they understand that NBCT is also a place where they belong. So I just wanted to add that point and be available for any questions at this time.
Well, excellent. Well, I know we have a lot of questions from both my colleagues, both Councilmember Navarro tapped me and Councilmember Jawando texted me. So as a good chair, I'm just going to say thank you for your collaboration when it comes to Montgomery College. This is certainly going to serve as a national model for us moving forward. This is huge, actually having childcare workers who can actually get upskilled while they're still in their jobs and don't have to be taken out of the workplace. That was one of the tremendous challenges that we heard from folks. And so being able to build that structure is just game changer. I mean, it truly is. And it's really going to get us to a place where we need to be in terms of if we're going to meet our goals for Excel certification by having certified teachers at the pre-K level and making sure they're in front of our kids to give our kids better opportunities. As you heard Councilmember Navarro say, that's where it starts, right? And so we've got to have that. And we know all too well that's why Councilmember Navarro got into this, was about that focus. So she's the resident expert there. Let me just say this, that I think that overall what you've put forth is exactly what we want. But there are some pieces that I think that we need to pay special and close attention to. And I don't want to steal my colleague's thunder because serving as chair, you kind of know where folks are in terms of knowing what kind of questions they're going to ask. So let me just go in two different directions. One is with our immigrant community that comes here that has certifications from home countries, and getting them immediately certified to get in front of our students is a tremendous plus. Again, you've got the diversity. You've got language, right? And you've got pre-certification. And so from that standpoint, it's a no-brainer. And then also our veterans. As we are approaching Operation Greenlight, which is an opportunity for us at the beginning of November across this nation, as we shine these green lights to remember our veterans who have served, we need to think about ways in which they can continue to serve in our communities, which also serves them. And one of the best things, we have these highly educated folks in our community who know all too much about so many different things. And to get them incorporated with our school system and be in front of our kids to talk about service, in addition to knowing the great things that are there, is just a tremendous plus for us. And so I'd like to see us talk about and do more when it comes to especially our immigrant community and our veterans. All the other things that you put out there, spot on in terms of where we need to be. But I think those are ones that we can shine a little bit more light on in terms of the ability for us to really get to that next level of dotting every I and crossing every T. So with that, let me turn it over to Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that presentation. First, congratulations, that 99% is an amazing number considering where we were and how worried everybody was, and it really is a testament to the excellent strategies that you have employed. So I want to say thank you. That's incredible, especially during this time. I also want to, congratulate you on the strategies that were described. I think they are definitely so aligned with, a lot of the conversations and really the best practices out there, right? Because this is all about intentionality. And I think forever we've been talking about that whatever we are going to do in order to grow, especially our teacher workforce of color, it has to be intentional. And we understand that with that comes also resources. So I think, Ms. Pinkart, as you said it, the fact that now there are resources that are available gives you an opportunity to then put into place those best practices. And I I know that it's only going to grow. No doubt, we've had tons of conversations about some of the assets that we have in the county. And I think that if you just listen to some of the deliberation when we were really trying to figure out where to take Worksession Montgomery, a lot of that was described, right? How do we, yes, leverage our immigrant population, the Welcome Center, et cetera, to see how we could, grow this particular cohort? Because when you look, obviously, at the trajectory of how much our school system has grown and the diversity in our school system, I think is what, 73% of color or something like that. I mean, again, this really calls for such a strategic effort, right? So when we were having those deliberations in 2019, it was focusing on how do we address those areas in the county, those professions where we were having some challenges. And so a lot of these strategies were described then. And a lot of it had to do with how do we coordinate then with the school system, with Montgomery College, with the USG, and also, of course, the private sector in terms of other industries. In this case was that notion of growing our own, not just in terms of who was already in the system, but as you said, Ms. Pinkard, how do we then show our students, especially students who maybe never even saw themselves involved in a profession such as teaching. Not only how do we then engage them, but then how could we incentivize that particular pathway in collaboration with the college, in collaboration with USG? In other words, could we offer tuition assistance? Could we figure out a way to have, even if it's a pilot, where we say, hey, we've recruited 50 high school students, and we are going to provide tuition assistance, and we're going to provide the mentoring that they need, because we know a lot of times, especially in our colleges, it's not just about recruiting our students of color, but it's like, how do we mentor them and support them so they can actually graduate, and then have that position ready at Mcps with even more supports, because that is another issue. And there's been lots and lots of articles written about the rate of how our teachers of color leave the profession, because it becomes such an extraordinary additional stressor to be in a situation where you're trying to address an issue such as the academic achievement gap or the opportunity gap, which disproportionately affects students of color, which means it disproportionately affects your community, right? And so there, tons of articles about the rate of how our teachers of color, educators leave the profession because the stress is just way too much and the support is not necessarily there to provide that. So I think that it's awesome what we are doing. I just hope again that we can align these efforts with what's already been discussed ad nauseum with when we were, having the conversation about Worksession Montgomery, but then specifically then, how do we shore this up, right? And I'll close by saying, because I just have one particular question, but I'll close by saying that this also came it was front and center when we were trying to expand dual language schools. Thinking about, the fact that 70% of ESOL students are U.S. citizens. So then it was like, well, why is it that they're in ESOL? Could there be a best practice that helps them not have to be in ESOL and not be tracked? And so the idea of dual language programs, which, everybody wants, right? Because our, Rock Creek Forest Spanish immersion program and Rolling Terrace, everyone, wants the dual language programs, Maryville. But at the same time, it could also serve that policy challenge, which is that if language is an asset, then maybe you don't have to put all these kids in ESOL and they, continue on ESOL. One of the challenges to expand the dual language program had to do with the availability of bilingual teachers. And so I think that there are, again, multiple policy areas that we could tackle within this initiative. But we do need to bring in those other partners and then maybe identify, this will be a budgetary thing to consider, obviously, during the next budget, to see whether there could be a line item to launch a pilot that includes the tuition assistance. Because I do worry that if we just say, okay, we're going to expose our students to this opportunity, let them know that this exists, I worry that it may not be enough, right? That, circumstances around income, around challenges of that nature, around lack of support may not be enough. So I just challenge all of us to maybe explore something a bit more targeted and see if it has that kind of return as we move forward. My only question was, I know that slide 5 talked, there was a mention of 1,390 teachers of color, I think, that had applied, but only 442 were hired. Is that because those were the spots that were available, or were there any other issues? I wasn't sure. What were the issues regarding the fact that 442 were hired, but 1,390 applied?
I'm not really sure. I just know those were the ones that were retained. I'm not sure if those were the best candidates, if they were the one that met all the requirements, but I can certainly get some more information for you on that. To kind of clarify between the applicants and then those that were actually selected. I do want to just concur with the earlier comments from Councilmember Rice regarding the immigrant community. I have attended all of the AIB meetings, all of the state technical assistance meetings, and the ones that were mostly related to pre-K and the blueprint. There were many, many providers on those calls who were hearing about the technical assistance, and one of the issues that was raised and continues to be raised is that they did not feel that there were enough people available at the state level to be able to review their credentials and to provide them some feedback about additional coursework that they may have if they were reviewing their credentials from another country. And then those that choose to use outside agencies, it can be very costly. And many people cannot afford to have their credentials reviewed by an outside agency. So that's certainly something that we've been trying to advocate with the state to sort of expand that. As we are expanding Blueprint each year, we're expanding our partnerships. And we have a 30%, a mixed delivery system this year, and then in 2 years up to 50%. We're going to need to be able to have more support for folks who have credentials from other countries. So that's something that we're going to be able to, that we're continuing to advocate for. And I think that will be a part of our platform as we advocate to the state and the AIB as they're looking to work on expanding some of the opportunities at the state level, but also with the higher education. And then the other piece I wanted to just add is to talk about the timeline as we move forward. There's some overlap in some of the pillars of the blueprint, but as we move forward with the college and career pathways, those who are college and career ready and those who are not yet meeting the standard, we're moving towards having to provide a no-cost pathway for them, and that also includes tuition assistance. So that would be able to solve some of the issues for students who maybe their parents could not afford to pay the tuition, but they wanted to be involved in the dual enrollment. So we're continuing to look at the ways that we can make a seamless pathway to recruit more students and then have an opportunity to pay their tuition, books, and fees. So that will, that's built in as a part of the blueprint so that we can remove any barriers, especially for families of students that cannot afford to participate. And then also, I remember reading in a Human Resources report recently that I believe we recruited in 110 new Spanish speakers as teachers, 23, I believe, who spoke French, and then 17 who spoke Mandarin. So we are continuing to increase our workforce in those that are bilingual and who bring other the strengths of other cultures into the workforce. So we will be continuing to do that, and then I will also touch bases and follow up as well about the veterans and what opportunities and pathways there are for veterans. So those two answers I will get back to you.
Great. One piece that I think would be important for the council, just as a follow-up, every time that we have to, when we start talking about what do we want to advocate through state ledge, I think it would be cool to have then a letter or when we include our priorities to, double down on this notion of resources for immigrant, members of the immigrant community that want to revalidate or the credential piece. That's going to be, I think, very, very important because, we talk about this every single year. I know we have the Welcome Back Center here, et cetera, but I think having that at the state level, it's going to be critical, as you were stating. It is quite expensive, and for a lot of people, they come here with all of these, different credentials from their home countries and then are stuck.
Yeah, many advanced degrees, many.
Very much so, yeah. I mean, when I was running Centro Familia, we had folks, and this is for family child care provider licenses, and we had folks who were physicians in their countries who were going through our programs to become licensed, but it was just so daunting. And, NPR recently had a whole story on, it's another topic, childcare and early childhood, but it is true that on the one hand, it's wonderful to have all these extraordinary requirements to strengthen quality. On the other hand, it's very costly for a lot of these providers to then be able to, comply with all of the additional training and everything like that. And they're losing a lot of their workforce because they don't get paid enough, but it's already cost prohibitive to parents. And so it's like, it hasn't changed, that vicious cycle of lack of opportunities to access quality and affordable childcare, early care, and education, that it's almost like that equation hasn't necessarily, changed. So, we have to continue to do more. And I think the blueprint is really attempting to do some of that as well. So
Just expanding that to meet what the need is, because there are many, many people out there who would be interested in joining with partnerships with the school system for the blueprint. But this may be a barrier.
absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Navarro. Before I turn to Councilmember Joando, I just wanted to highlight that my work with the National Association of Counties, we actually just passed a resolution that was a policy initiative for the National Association of Counties that specifically addressed what you were just talking about, Councilmember Navarro, which is that we need to make sure that tuition assistance is there for those who are entering into our teaching pathways. As this is a national problem, as you said, Ms. Backey, that we see this across. This isn't something unique to Montgomery County. It is something where the federal government needs to play a role in terms of helping states and local jurisdictions to address this issue. And so to that end, there are many programs that have been out there that allow for service to be then paid off via commitment. And so what we're looking at is advocating for that to go into our teaching professions as well. So certainly something at the federal level to where we are looking to say that if you're committing to a certain number of years of teaching, we would then pay off your student loans. These are kinds of things that, again, will be innovative in terms of contributing to the diversity of the workforce, as well as address more people going into the workforce, understanding that a lot of the time in which folks spend, keep in mind, these are folks who are getting master's degrees. So that's a lot of time and money to then be paid at the lower end of the salary scale comparative to other professions that have equal or less requirements. I mean, engineering, I know, I majored in it. It's 4 years, 4-year degree. You come out making twice as much as some teachers do. Why is that, right? But yet those same teachers then go and teach the future engineers. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But anyway, I digress. It is important for us to make sure that we have those kinds of programs. So I look forward to working with us at both the state and federal level to make sure that we're highlighting those kinds of initiatives that I think will help us address those issues as well. Let me turn to Councilmember Joando.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. I couldn't agree with you more, both of you. And just to put a fine point on one of the things that both Chair Rice and Councilmember Navarro brought up about this issue that we've talked about before. We always talk about this deja vu, and I can only imagine the deja vu that my colleagues have, having been on much longer than I am. But this, we every year, in this year we had it again, the Wallet Hub came out for the most diverse cities in the nation in the top 10. 3 in the top 10, and then Rockville just outside, and then Gaithersburg, Germantown, Silver Spring. A third of our residents foreign-born. All the things we know we have, incredible assets. We have asked before in this setting, and I think in joint committee sessions as well, to Councilmember Navarro's point of our priorities for Annapolis as we head into the session in January, of not just more money for training and certification and retraining, but how can we move the bar, like of what we qualify as appropriate training, looking at that more holistically, because it's one thing to put the burden on try to fit a square peg into a round hole and say, you have to change and adapt completely to what we have. And obviously there are some standards that must be met, but this idea that people are coming in with a depth of knowledge that fits a diverse and global population that we are in so many ways, how do we make recommendations to our state legislature who's open to it, and to whatever other bodies we need to make them to change what the standards are so that people can qualify more with what they have. And so I'd love you to talk to me a little bit about, is that happening? Is there an MCPS group working on those? I think, because we had asked, I think in previous sessions, what are those things? Let's put them on a letter. We want to help advocate. Where is that, and is that happening right now?
Well, I think the teacher requirements are set at the state level by the Maryland State Department of Education. So that's not something that we really can locally change.
Well, no, I mean just recommendations. What I'm saying is we want to advocate, and we have talked to our colleagues who work at the state level, and we're going to have a new governor, and we're going to have a whole bunch of new things coming up in January. I think this is the ideal time to make the recommendations, is what I'm saying.
So I think one of the things that has come up at a lot of the MSDE and AIB meetings is around providing more scholarships for four-year education. Many years ago, there was a Kristen McAuliffe scholarship, so that if you agreed that you would teach in the state of Maryland beyond the time that you graduated, they would cover your tuition costs. So we're looking for lots of additional scholarships to help pay for education, to incentivize and recruit more people to come to education. Making this transition from having a degree in a certain area to becoming education certified, some help and support for that. Lots of online opportunities, opportunities for folks to work in their current profession or site, especially for the childcare community, to be able to work while going to school at the same time. So online opportunities, evening classes, some alternative work schedule types of programs that could help to recruit folks. And then I think, I'm trying to think of what else. Again, the help with the credentials. Yes.
Is it Ms. Backey? Am I saying that right?
You are.
Okay. I just want to make sure you understand my question. So those things are helpful, and I think those are important. That's kind of helping people meet the current standards. What I'm saying is we're at a time where we need a bigger set of solutions. We need to say, are the standards appropriate considering our population? And I know you can't change it. You don't have the magic wand.
Right.
But I think the mix is, the new people are going to be in place between the legislature and change the leadership and the governorship and the State Board of Education will change. All these things will change. The superintendents will change to advocate for, hey, we're the largest, most diverse school system in the state. We have a third of our population's foreign-born. Here's what we think are the appropriate standards. Let's modify so that more people, as they are, can already come in and teach and be paraeducators and the like. So that's what I'm talking about, is the kind of analysis of the current standards vis-a-vis what could be possible based on our population and the many advanced degrees that people are bringing over. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I think it is a conversation that has come up a lot in our work groups and dialogue with Health and Human Services as well, in terms of, really looking at some of the workforce that we have now and what can we do to try to move people into the profession as soon as possible. So I think I'll work on summarizing those and then being able to present those back to you in a succinct manner.
Awesome.
Some specific recommendations I think that can help move our workforce forward. We have so many people who are eager to work with children, especially young children who have, worked really hard. They're coming in with credentials and degrees from other areas, as we've mentioned, and they want to be able to get a smoother pathway, an easier pathway. They're willing to do the work in order to move forward. So we'll certainly work on that list and get it back to you, and we appreciate you advocating. We appreciate you.
I appreciate that. And we hear from them all the time, and these folks, and they're here. So I appreciate that, and I hope we can, Mrs. Rodriguez-Hernandez and the committee, we can really come back to that prior to January, so that we can have some recommendations.
Absolutely. I think colleague
go
wanted
ahead.
to add a point to the
Please,
conversation.
yes.
One pillar of the blueprint legislation that we anticipate are those changes to the career ladder. And embedded in that work are some exciting pieces. Currently, one of the barriers that individuals find with pursuing certification is the timeline that they are approved to by the state in order to earn that credential. And so embedded in some of those career ladder proposals is extending that time by a couple of years, which will then make pursuing certification far more feasible for people who might not have those credentials entering into the profession. And then other aspects of the career ladder, I think, give honor and respect to teachers as they grow in their capacity and in their leadership over time in the profession in ways that we haven't been able to compensate currently. So with that, as teachers grow, expand their professional learning and development, show demonstrated results with student achievement and performance, their efforts can also be honored as we look to where the career ladder will go by that July 2024 benchmark. So some of that is there with our partners in the state, but certainly there are other things that we can explore to minimize those barriers.
The career ladder also builds in mentorship and support of teachers as they move along in the process. And as the career ladder is developed, there's a portion of time that the teacher will spend outside the classroom being mentored by other teachers, engaging in professional development. But I think likewise, we've got to find some other supports for people who may be in the community, who may be the community-based providers or others who are looking for some pathways to enter in the profession, who perhaps have not been involved in the school system but are interested in entering in the profession and through many different entryways.
I appreciate that, and you anticipated something I was going to bring up about the career ladder being a key component of this, and obviously really important because many core parts of that have to be negotiated with our our partners. So they're going to have to be full participants in figuring that out as we head in. And I know you're not on those teams, but just want to state the obvious. And so I think that piece that we're talking about, who we have here already, and then who we have coming up, they're also here, our young people that it was already a discussion had. How do we grow our own? And I'm glad we have an focus on that. I look forward to seeing how that strategic plan, getting more into the details on that as it develops, and creating all these different types of pathways into education from our students who are here. Are you tracking now? For example, could someone tell me how many former MCPS students are in in MCPS, one of the 24,000 employees today?
Is it 228 in this last
I don't
year?
know the number, but I know.
I think it's 228.
Yeah, we self-report.
If you don't have it, it's fine. I just want to know. I think it's something it's not
I'm
a gotcha.
thinking over 200 within the last year, but I can get the specific number for you. I know it's included in the diversity report, but it's
I was trying to
it's a
find
few
that.
hundred.
I'm sure. Okay. So I just think that's a good thing to have a metric against and be tracking as part of, obviously we want all the strategies to get them into, but also hold ourselves accountable to the goals we want to have for that population as well. And then my last question for now is just about the diversity, how we're defining diversity. Obviously, racial and ethnic, extremely important. Is that also, does a diverse teacher candidate, I think that's the word you use, a diverse educator candidate, diverse candidate, does that include LGBTQ+? Does it include disabled?
It does. And there's, I'll report that there was a statewide work group that included folks from human resources across the entire state, blueprint coordinators, and we all sort of worked together to look at how we would agree to expand some of the definitions of the diversity. So it certainly includes many other groups and abilities, and so it does go beyond race in terms of the diversity piece.
And so we should, again, we should track and report that and talk about that and have goals for all that. And that's good to hear. And as far as the 99%, we're such a big system though, so the 1% is still a lot of people. What are our current vacancies? Are they mostly educate? Where are they? Where are the biggest vacancies? And what are we doing to try to even close that, what is a very small gap, which I'm happy to hear, but what are we seeing based on the current state of vacancies?
I'm not sure exactly what the exact numbers are on the vacancies. I can get back to you on that. I know bus drivers is one area that we continue to work on. We're continuing to try to recruit and retain bus drivers, but I'll get back to you about the specifics because I don't know exactly which groups are included in the 1% to date.
Awesome. And then I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, this is my last question. I'm like a black
problem.
preacher right now. I've got 3 closings. The target universities, I was really happy to see that list and the target states. I was just curious, what was the methodology there? How was that developed? Is that based on who we have, or what was the process of that?
You want to speak to that and then I'll add to it.
As a member of the recruitment team, we worked with our supervisor, who is charged with strategic teacher recruitment, and he has access to a lot of different data sources to take a look at how many students are in a school or college of education at a specific university, and then what is the overall racial and ethnic diversity among those students in those institutions. So many of the institutions that you see on the slide and in the report highlight those spaces where those universities have a high number of diverse students. And we want to engage those students because they represent the type of diversity we know that is essential in MCPS. So that's one marker of how the recruitment team determines where to go and who to meet with. And then especially if you look at some of the universities that were mentioned in Texas and Florida, they also represent a high number of students who are potentially bilingual or in those content areas that are of critical need in the district.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. This is great information. I'm glad you're on the case and look forward to continue our dialogue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Joando. And as always, you guys tee it up perfectly for me to do some closing stuff as well and gave me some other ideas. So there are a couple things. One is about when we're talking about the diversity of our workforce, and certainly that goes across the board amongst a number of different categories. And one of the things that I didn't see listed, but is the highlight, because we're right here, and I'm going to, just talk about it a little bit because it's a source of personal pride for me. But Gallaudet University, where my mother taught for 35 years, and they very interesting things. So that definitely needs to be highlighted as one of them, especially because just as we have incredibly diverse in terms of race and ethnicity, we also here have one of the largest deaf and hard of hearing populations in the nation. And it's because of our proximity to Model Secondary School for the Deaf, Kendall School, and Gallaudet University, all on one campus right here in DC. And so a lot of those folks and families have lived here forever. I know that I've got a large portion of them in my district that I know all too well. And it's very interesting because my daughter, who's in an ASL class at Northwest, now has a deaf teacher teaching that class. It was taught by a hearing teacher, so kudos to MCPS for hiring someone who's a Gallaudet University graduate. He's a doctor and is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So from that perspective, it's just great. So from that perspective, it's like, it really is important for us to make sure that we continue those kinds of relationships. So of all the schools that you mentioned, they're great, that's there. And I also want to highlight another school that I think would be, because it is the alma mater of your superintendent and also my mother, which is South Carolina State University. Another school that's got great diversity, pulling from our Black African-American historic community, and a lot of them do migrate. A lot of our South Carolina folks do migrate up here to the north in the Maryland area. And so that would be another one to add to the mix because they do have a very robust pre-teaching program that's there. And so just another one that I'd add. But I did want to talk a little bit about beyond just those exact particulars, just in theory, about what it is that we need to do. And so I'm curious, when it comes to continuing to highlight, because at the end of the day, the Kerwin Commission / Blueprint recommendations are one of the things that talk about what to do for a person who's there, right? Who's already at that point, whether it's a person who's looking at those career pathways and others. What are we doing to highlight for our children that these are career pathways that we want our kids to go into? I know, and I'll just say this, when we go to, and we're invited to a lot of our career days, the folks who are speaking are firefighters and astronauts, which is great. I mean, they're fantastic. You know, I was an aerospace engineering major, so great. You know, I love to see that. But how many of them are teachers? And, you know, do we have them speaking about that and saying, this is a profession we want? Because you're in the house, right? You're in the house, you're right there. And I think that oftentimes we don't, and having those kinds of conversations, so I'm just curious, and maybe it's happening, it's just not happening at the school that I happen to be at on that particular day, right? Because you got a lot. And so from that perspective, what is it, 164 now? I mean, 660. Yeah, 162,000 students. So, I mean, it's like, okay. Yeah, but the reality is that there's got to be some way in which we can change the conversation around what it is that we're doing with all of those students and getting them to be more engaged in terms of saying, this is a profession that we want you to go into. So can you talk a little bit about what some of the efforts are with the school system from that perspective?
Sure. So a couple of initiatives have started, and of course, we want to expand and grow. I'll be transparent. They're a little bit in the infancy at this point, but we are excited because of the potential that some of these actions can take. We were delighted to celebrate 12 students at the end of last year. These are our graduates who had either been in our child development programs or had just expressed an interest in pursuing teaching as a career. We celebrated and honored them. We were able to employ a few of them for summer employment within the school system as a first job. And then we will engage those students during their winter breaks, their summer breaks, throughout their 4-year program. And we have committed to them, if they successfully complete their program, they have a job opportunity as a teacher in MCPS. So starting with that group, build upon that group and expand it for this year's class of 2023. Additionally, our office in HR is connecting with other offices so that we are directly connected with the college and career centers in each of our 25 high schools, so that when they are hosting their career days and inviting speakers, we don't take for granted that the students will see that MCPS is also an employer, and not just a place to have a job, but where they can begin and grow their career over time. So we weren't at the career day where you were participating recently, but our team is committed to going out to the schools and doing that type of direct outreach with our students. So just a couple of ideas of how we are engaging our students for those opportunities.
Perfect. One of the mistakes I think that oftentimes we make, and now that I've reached that 50-year-old mark, and you know, it's always about remembering our young folks. So I want to invite our student member of the board, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but Mr. Kim, if you can come up, because I think that it is important for us to hear from your perspective as a student and a student member of the board, what some of the conversations are and what we can do as elected leaders, but also as policymakers when it comes to ensuring that that conversation is there. What are you hearing from your fellow students when it comes to teaching profession? What do you think more we need to do to change the paradigm of folks not really considering those pathways? So I'd just love to hear from you as well.
Yes, thank you. And I'll begin by stating there really is no way to understate the importance of what we're talking about today, seeing yourself represented in the classroom. And that really goes across the board. You know, I think in Montgomery County, when you look at across the nation, across the world, perhaps, the students are really lucky to have so many channels to advocate and have their voice heard. My role on the board being a testament to that. But of course, there is always going to be a need to provide those opportunities to students to hear what they have to say, to ensure that their role in shaping their education and their community, not even in education alone, but really the county and the community as a whole, really is critical to have young people involved in those conversations. Of course, when we talk about career readiness and pathways, it really boils down to changing what the educational experience looks like. Understanding that after you get your diploma, not every student is going to go to college. Not every student is going to have X career or Y career, and to grow the opportunities that we can provide students to be involved in all fields of work it is really critical. And that, of course, goes hand in hand with the work we're doing on the board, with the work you all are doing on the council, and, of course, the work of the school system.
Do you hear a lot of people, and this is first from a student perspective, who are saying, yeah, I want to be a teacher, and if not, why do you think they're not saying those things? We obviously are hearing the standard professions that are out there, but I personally don't, but I don't want to assume as though I've got my finger on the pulse. You're closer to that from that standpoint. So amongst your friend groups, amongst the folks that you've talked to, do you see that? Do you hear that? And if so, maybe why? If you've even heard folks comment about, yeah, I don't want to be a teacher because X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, I think the student experience does greatly vary across schools and even within schools. I think there's perhaps an intrinsic challenge with being a student, being face-to-face with the teacher every day, and understanding that that is also a position that I, as a student, could potentially come to one day. I think there's, of course, it requires consideration of how can an educator educate students, but also present education as an area of education itself, if that makes sense, if you are kind of following what I'm saying. I think that, it really boils down to the student experience again. And this, of course, ties into our work diversifying our workforce. I can definitely speak. I know many of my peers can speak. I'm sure you all can perhaps speak to maybe that one teacher in elementary school that really laid the foundation for your work throughout your career as a student and perhaps afterwards. I think it really does come from a place of professional development and onboarding diverse staff, of providing this experience to students to say, this is the power of education. I think empowerment, I guess, is really what it boils down to see the role you can play in someone else's life. I think that the work in that area will really bear fruit to painting education in this way.
I think that's great. I really appreciate it, and I apologize for just putting you on the spot like that, but it's clear as to why you were elected as student member of the board, because you hop in and you immediately go right in. So, kudos to the students that elected you and for yourself. But certainly for us, and I think that what you said is important, because you've harped on it a number of times now, which is, again, seeing yourself in that classroom to see yourself in that position. Right? If all your experience is in seeing people who don't look like you in that profession, it's very hard to then picture yourself in that profession. That's what you're saying, and I get it. I understand. Heard loud and clear. And so I think that, it's the chicken and the egg. Which one do you do first, right? But it's kind of both, right? We still have to provide those opportunities for onboarding, but at the same time, we have to make sure that the faces of the people that are in our classrooms look like the students, so that they can see themselves in those positions. Yeah, please, no.
Thank you. So something you said made me think of this notion when you said, it's about empowerment, right? Or it's about that student feeling maybe inspired by a particular teacher. So what do you believe? Do you believe that, in general, and I know it's a generalization, but the education system itself and the way it's run and the way it's designed, right? Is it overall inspiring? Is it engaging? Because we hear those one-off, right? We hear about those teachers who are just so creative in the way that they teach and so engaging, et cetera. But it doesn't seem to be like the norm, right? So is that something that you hear perhaps informally, not necessarily that, your peers or the students that you represent come to you and say, hey, I think that we should have a more creative and engaged, but is that like an undercurrent in a way, sort of like, is the educational system really one that a young person then sees themselves in the future, participating in because it's creative, it's innovative, it's inspiring, or does it feel just kind of stagnant and kind of like, bureaucratic or something like that? What do you think about that?
I think that really is what it means to have a meaningful and robust educational system, to not only leave students with information or the skills they need, but to deeply inspire them and genuinely connect them to these opportunities. When you look at it from that lens, I think that, of course, as we continue to work and progress education across the nation, really, it is going to bear those results. But at the same time, it would be ignorant not to recognize the students that do fall through the cracks, who our education system may not reach in the same way as it reaches other students. And that, I guess, really is the work of a public school system to continue to grow that net of what students are falling under that umbrella of who's really being impacted and inspired and driven and motivated, and seeing how we can improve to reach those students who are currently not. I think when you hear this is from students, our school system needs to improve on X or Y or Z, I think that's an indication of these are the ways where maybe we're not being inspired, or these are the needs that are not being met, that we need to be met in order to be inspired. When we talk about driving forward the school system, I think that's what it looks like.
Okay, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm constantly thinking of how communication has, changed so dramatically, and the way that young people actually connect to information. And so then I think of, like the design of our school systems, right? And how it is not generally adapting to the change that is occurring. And so why do we then wonder that so many students are not engaged, right? I mean, there are some things that we have to think about that go beyond even like teacher diversity. It's just sort of like that methodology adapting to such a vastly, changed world in general. So I was just curious, because I do wonder about that in terms of how do we then engage, our young population to consider teaching if maybe they think that it's just not, vibrant enough or multidimensional enough, for them to feel like they can make a difference in that way. So appreciate it.
If I could just add, one of my favorite anecdotes that I heard recently was from a child development teacher at one of the high schools, and a student came up to her and said, you look like you're having a lot of fun in this job. Like you're dealing with the little kids, you're dealing with us, this is a whole community. And very genuinely, the student turned to the teacher and said, did you go to school for this? Like, was this something that you went to school for? So I think sometimes the proximity of our students, it is hard for them to see their teacher as, you teach me, but then this is also a career that can, be very fulfilling for a lifetime. And so with that, I offer that we often are recruiting students at different points who make the decision about what they want to do next. So we will always have a group of high school students who are focused and know that that's the career path they want to embark upon. What is growing, and we see happen more frequently, are those students who majored in something other than education, who are coming out of college. So their mind may have been, I'm going to be a chemist, I'm going to be an engineer, and somewhere along the way, they then start to see education as, that relationship piece, that social justice component that develops in different points for different people. So one of the commitments we have in the school district is to make sure there's an entry point at every stage, whether that be that high school student who knows they're going to go into a college of ed, that content major who changes their mind upon graduation, or people who go into industry they end up becoming a researcher, they end up working in a lab, and they recognize it's not fulfilling a part of them that they then want to translate into a career into education. And so we just have to approach it in a multi-pathway strategy so that whenever an individual makes up their mind, they have a way of entering the profession.
Ms. Pinkard, let me just say, what you just said, and I hope people picked up on it, because you said social justice. And so many of our students, and Councilmember Juando, I got you. I'm coming to you now, but this is how I'm going to kick it over to you. But the mother of racial equity and social justice for this county, I'm really happy that you said that, because that actually taps into where our students are. I mean, our students clearly care about social justice issues, and that is a motivating factor. So I think part of it is also how we talk about the profession, right? Instead of talking about it as just teaching, which you said it yourself, Mr. Kim, that it's not just with something that is about giving people a lesson, but it's also about inspiring them about the change that they can make in their communities and understanding that education is a tool to do that. That is the definition of what social justice is about, right? It's about being able to have those kinds of things. And so I think from that perspective, it's also how we talk about what teaching is, right? And changing that dynamic about our conversation of what it is to be a teacher as an enactor of social change, right? Because if we believe all those things that are associated with the power of education that I just heard all of you say, when it comes to giving kids opportunity, when it comes to reducing so many of the inequities that we see in our community, if we truly believe that, then every single teacher is an agent of social justice, right? And so from that perspective, highlighting that to our students and saying, wouldn't you like to change your community? Wouldn't you like to be a leader in the social justice movement? Well, then teach a child, right? That's what it's about. Councilmember Juando.
Amen. Amen. I couldn't agree more, and it's so good to see our student board member up here as well. Two quick things that I wanted to mention. I had jotted down but didn't mention. It feeds into the conversation that we're having. You know, there was a report came out a couple of years ago that showed that if a black student has a black teacher in elementary school, just one, they're 13% or so more likely to graduate from college, high school and college, and get post-secondary education. If they have two, they're 32% more likely, just like it's astronomically doubled. And similar role model effects for other student populations, right? And I also want to acknowledge, as I ask this question, that we are always the enemy of our own success here. We're doing better than the nation as far as, like, if you look at our diversity of our population, I think it was 18% African American. You know, we're better than the averages across the nation, but obviously we have to measure ourselves against our own success and keep pushing. You know, as Councilmember Navarro mentioned, you know, we're 70+% students of color. We've got more to do. We have to get those numbers closer. And so one of the questions I had for the team here was, one was a data question, and then one was kind of a programmatic question. The data question is, are we tracking, and I tried to find this in the data, but, you know, we have the race and ethnicity breakdown and where they are and what schools, as far as what level. Are we tracking the crosstabs, like the gender, like black male teachers who are like nationwide or 2% of the teaching profession, for example? And, you know, we have programs that are trying to encourage, you know, obviously we have an issue of just trying to get more males in the profession in general. But is that something that we're looking at and we have a goals? I didn't see that number represented. I'm sure there's a way to get to it, but could you just answer that one for me? The breakdown between race and gender specifically?
I think that's data that we can gather for you. We can make that data available to you.
Okay.
I cannot cite the numbers exactly today,
Right.
But I think it's information that is available.
Available, yeah. And I think, again, like I said earlier, I think it's important to track those subgroup categories too and have goals and just try to hold ourselves accountable on all those. And the other question is tied to that. It's about retention. You know, we talked a lot about how we're recruiting, and we talked a little bit about retention today, but, you know, particularly for populations where we see high burnout rates. You know, like when I looked at some of the data that you all had in the report that you sent ahead, it showed, you know, how many people are being removed or fired, how many people retire each year. You know, I think it was somewhere between 800 and 1,000 a year-ish, as far as, you know, is the norm. And I'd be really curious to know, in the context of retention, you know, we know there's key points in time, like that 3 to 5 year mark for young teachers when they burn out and without the right supports, or if they don't have the right career ladder in place, which we talked about earlier, that we know they're going to be at risk for losing them. And then we have to kind of, you know, really step up our recruitment again. Could you talk a little bit about the retention efforts and how that's factored into what you're looking at in fulfilling the blueprint goals?
Talk about the career ladder and then you add that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm going to just talk for a second. We're both commenting on this topic, but one of the things that is built into the blueprint, and as we move towards developing the career ladder, is really to build in supports for the teacher. So we want to keep as many highly skilled teachers as we can in the classroom. We know that we sometimes lose some of them to administration. People may choose to leave the classroom for different reasons. Sometimes it's income. But one of the strengths of the blueprint in terms of the career ladder is to allow for teachers to have time outside of the classroom where they can work on professional development, where they can be mentored by other teachers, when they can work on strategies to help those highly impacted students. So as Councilmember Navarro had mentioned about just the, you know, teachers working with highly impacted students, and they may be from their own communities, there's really an opportunity to do a lot of the professional development and a lot of the spending some time for the teachers to really kind of work on their own professional development, to have other teachers support them. So I think those are some of the things that we need to look at. And then as we look at what's negotiated through that process, we can also look at what other types of supports might be needed, in particular for different subgroups of teachers. So I just wanted to mention that the career ladder really, there's an attempt to sort of build in those supports for the teachers and allow them time outside of the classroom to be able to work on their personal goals as well as developing them as a teacher and making them feel a part of a larger cohort that really supports them. So I'll just mention that, and then my colleague has.
Within the district, I'll try to summarize the work of my colleagues in the Department of Professional Growth Systems. That's the team within HR who is dedicated to what we call that life cycle of an educator. And that starts with what happens when they're onboarded. So that very first day, that first week, that first year, the new educator orientation, those supports that office provides. One support that I know is highly effective is that every novice teacher has a dedicated master teacher. We call them consulting teachers in the district, who it provides support and feedback, troubleshooting, a shoulder of support, you know, through that very sort of roller coaster ride of the first year. So that consulting teacher is one layer of support for novice teachers. And we do have novice teachers who may not have met standard within that first year. And as a part of our professional growth and evaluation system, they are afforded time to grow and develop and achieve standard. And that may be a different timeline for different teachers. So they receive that continued support if needed through their second and third year of teaching. Additionally, those new teachers to the district, so we have experienced teachers who are new to a very unfamiliar school system, and they are eligible for mentors. So a mentor will engage with an experienced teacher in a very different way. You know, we differentiate that support so that they don't necessarily need the nuts and bolts of surviving a first year, but they need to acclimate to the norms and expectations within the school system. And there's someone within their building who can provide that support. So those are two large resources that we have to make someone be able to persevere through those challenges where they might be reconsidering their options, but let them stay encouraged, receive that feedback so that they can grow and learn and realize that they have a place in the profession.
I appreciate that. We can't overstate how important that retention, all those efforts are. And I know there'll be more in that, and maybe in the future time we can dig in deeper with your colleagues that do that work. To bring it home and turn it back to Councilmember Rice, is he mentioned veterans. You know, my best and most impactful teacher ever was my 4th grade math teacher, Mr. Williams, who was a veteran. In his previous, I didn't know this until recently, he was a Vietnam fighter pilot, retired, and then became an elementary math teacher at MCPS as a second career. And I meet him, in the late 80s at Oakview Elementary. And he's like a superhero figure for me. Black male teacher, only one I ever had, and had a huge impact on my life. So I don't know if he was in a program. I doubt it. I think he just probably decided to do that. But it's to the point of like, there's just so much we have here that we can get into our system. And I appreciate all the work you all are doing to make it happen. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Joando. I'd be remiss if I did not also seek out, we have a resident millennial who's on our staff here, and the person who was focused on education we brought from the education space. So Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez, I'm curious for you, from the same perspective, what actually drew you to be involved and engaged when it came to the education space, and why is that something that spoke to you, and what are you hearing from your fellow colleagues who are involved, engaged in the education space as well?
All righty, resident millennial.
Very rarely does the staff get put in the spotlight like this, so this is great. This is a great opportunity.
I think for me, I'm an MCPS student as well. I was in the Roberto Clemente Middle School Magnet Program and the Poulswell High School Magnet Program, and it was very fortunate for me to have that privilege and opportunity, but I also realized that a lot of my peers were white and not Latino or Latinx or Black, so that was a very stark perspective for me to be in, and I know there's been a lot of efforts to increase the diversity of our magnet program students, and also just allowing all students to have the opportunities, the enriching opportunities of magnet schools. So that's really wonderful, and so that's how I remember back then it was the environment and education were very big topics, and for me I was like, oh well, everyone's doing environment and the education's really close to me, so I'm going to pursue this to help in that field. And so that's why I went into the education policy zone, and I think a lot of teachers for me right now, a lot of my friends and co-students, I think a lot of it is the burnout that we've been talking about the resources they need and the support they need to help with not only just closing academic disparities, but also I think behavioral management in the classroom and things like that we're seeing in our schools. So that's why I went to education sphere.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez, and it ties into what Councilmember Joando was talking to you about, the importance for us to also, as we're focusing on onboarding teachers, that retention of teachers that is incredibly important as well, and providing the resources, especially when it comes to our newer teachers, understanding that it's a different ballgame. I mean, it's very interesting because I just had a conversation, we'll close with this because I don't want to overextend my colleagues, but I was having a conversation with my mother, who was actually thinking about going back into the classroom, mainly because we still have a shortage. The main piece of the shortage of your teacher cohort is special education teachers. And so as a certified special education teacher, as I said before, she was thinking about trying to help out part-time. And when she started to talk to my daughter about some of the things that are just happening in schools and about the classroom and what to expect, she started to pause because the environment is very different from what it used to be. And so I do think that while we've made great strides in terms of disciplinary procedures and others that have certainly impacted our children of color with less suspensions and all those kinds of things, there also is a place for us to talk about what the teacher experience is as well and make sure that that's a part of that discussion. right? Because what we don't want is to see our teachers who feel as though they're powerless in our classrooms, right? And so there's that balance that needs to be there. And so it's continuing to work on what that fine line is. I think we're not far from it. And I think we've made, again, great strides. But I do think that from our teaching cohort, we do need to provide our teachers with that necessary support and a lot of the different ways in which you can interact with students when it comes to these kinds of interactions and concerns. It's all a part of what it is that we need to do to help continue to support our teachers and help them to grow on that career ladder also, right? So I think that that's another key component as well. Well, listen, I think we've had a very robust discussion today. I think that it's important to highlight, as my colleagues have said, we have made great strides. And we find ourselves at the forefront in leaders, as we often do, not just in the state, but in the nation. But we also know that the expectations of our constituency is that we continue to grow. Just because we're leaders doesn't mean we stop there. We've got to continue to do more to make sure that we have more of our folks that are represented in the classroom that aren't currently there. I know, and I'll just say this, that when I went to China and went to South Korea to look at their education systems as we were benchmarking for Kerwin, it's a very different ballgame there. And it's very interesting because I don't hold parents of Asian students who say, I don't want my child to go into the teaching profession, because that's another one when you talk about the lack of diversity. You don't see a lot of Asians who are also as teachers because they're not experiencing the same thing that they experienced in their home countries, to where they see the teaching profession held to that higher standard. And so I don't blame them for not wanting their child to be in something that doesn't meet the same respect and level of success as it would in their home country. So we got to fix that, right? And that's what the blueprint, that's what Kerwin was all about, was about making sure that it speaks to every single person in our community, that our teaching profession is held to that higher standard in terms of support as well as vision from our community. I think with a lot of the things that we've talked about here and the things that are already underway in terms of the report from MCPS, we are well on the way to getting there. I think that our innovative approaches, working with our community college, working with a number of our other universities up and down the East Coast, makes sense for us in terms of getting us there as well. So I'm hopeful that while it won't happen while Councilmember Navarro and I are still here with 2 months to go, I'm not counting, but I do know with Councilmember Juwando, who's returning, and with our staff that's returning, and all of you who will continue to be here, and we'll still be around, we'll still be pushing, that we will get there. So with that, we are adjourned, but thank you so much for all of your great reporting, and we look forward to seeing even more progress.
Thank
so
you.
Thank you.
We'll get you the answers to the other questions.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. With that, we're adjourned.
Ridgefield Road will be closed in